All right, today we're talking about a tick-borne disease you may not have heard of, but you definitely should know about. It's called babesiosis, and it's kind of the lesser known, but still very serious cousin to Lyme disease.
So let me ask you a question. When you think about getting sick from a tick bite, what's the first thing that pops into your head? It's probably Lyme disease, right? And for good reason. But here's the thing. Ticks are carrying a whole lot more than just Lyme. One of the really significant pathogens they can carry is a parasite that causes babesiosis. And that's what we're going to unpack today.
So what is babesiosis? Well, at its core, it's caused by these tiny, single-celled parasites from the Babesia family. They're what's known as endoparasites, which is just a sciencey way of saying they live inside their host's body. And their target are red blood cells. They invade them, they multiply, and they destroy them from the inside out. This whole process is why it often gets called the malaria-like illness of the Northern Hemisphere. It's a very similar game plan, just a different microscopic invader. Now, there are actually over 100 known species of Babesia, but for us, we're really going to focus on the two that are the biggest deal for human health. They come from the same family for sure, but as you're about to see, they have very different ways of operating. And here they are, Babesia microti and Babesia divergens. Now, you'll want to remember those names, because even though they're closely related, where you find them, how sick they can make you, and the level of danger they represent are all worlds apart. So let's put these two parasites side by side and really look at what makes them different. Understanding their individual profiles is absolutely key to understanding the risks that each one poses. Okay, so first up, you have Babesia microti. This is the main one you'll find in North America. Its primary host, or reservoir, is usually a small rodent, like a white-footed mouse. In humans, it generally causes a milder illness. In fact, it can even be totally asymptomatic. Then, on the other hand, you have Babesia divergens. This is the major European player. It prefers larger hosts like cattle and deer, and when it infects a person, wow, it causes a much more severe, often life-threatening illness if it's not caught and treated quickly. Now, if we take a peek at their scientific family tree, something really interesting pops out. You can see they're in the same phylum as the parasite that causes malaria, but look all the way down at the species level. They belong to different clades, which you can kind of think of as different branches on that family tree. Babesia microti is in clade 1, while the Babesia divergens is in clade X. And this genetic difference is a huge piece of the puzzle explaining why one is usually milder and the other can be so much more dangerous for us.
So how in the world does a parasite this small make the journey from a mouse in the woods into a person? Well, it's all thanks to this really intricate life cycle. It's like a fascinating two-act play that needs both a tick and a mammal to pull it off.
So it all starts when an infected tick bites a mammal. It injects these little parasites called sporozoites. Now, unlike malaria, these guys don't bother with the liver. They make a beeline straight for the red blood cells, and that's where they start to multiply. Later, a brand new, clean tick comes along and bites that same infected animal, and now it's carrying the parasite. Inside this new tick, the parasites reproduce sexually, creating a fresh batch of sporozoids. And just like that, the cycle is ready to start all over again. This diagram here shows the whole elegant, and let's be honest, kind of scary process. The big thing to get here is this two-host system. The tick is what we call the definitive host. That's where the parasite's sexual reproduction happens. The mammal is just the intermediate host, basically a temporary pit stop. For the parasite to really thrive long-term, it needs to get back into a tick. That's actually why we humans are called dead-end hosts. We can get super sick, but from the parasite's point of view, we're not the best next step in its life plan.
Okay, now here is a critical difference between our two parasites, and it explains so much about why this disease persists. It's a concept called transovarial transmission. And you can pretty much think of it as a parasitic superpower that Babesia divergens has, but Babesia microti totally lacks. A female tick infected with Babesia divergens can pass the parasite directly down to her eggs. This means that entire generations of ticks can be born already infected, ready to spread the disease with their very first bite. Babesia microti, on the other hand, has to get lucky and find an infected rodent to feed on every single time just to keep its cycle going. It's a much bigger hurdle.
To really see how these biological details play out in the real world, let's look at a fascinating case study that's been unfolding in the Netherlands. It's a perfect story of how a disease can go from being someone else's problem to a local reality, almost in the blink of an eye. For years and years in the Netherlands, babesiosis was just considered an import disease, something you only got if you went traveling. But at the same time, scientists knew the building blocks for an outbreak were already there. They'd found the parasites in local ticks, Babesia microti in local rodents, and Babesia divergens in local deer. Then, in September of 2023, everything changed. The Dutch National Institute for Public Health confirmed the very first case that was acquired locally. The threat wasn't just a foreign concept anymore, it was officially homegrown. Okay, so we've seen how the parasite moves around and how it can pop up in a new place. But what does it actually feel like to be sick with babesiosis? And more importantly, what can we do to fight it? The symptoms often kick off feeling like a really bad flu. We're talking high fever, chills, sweats, muscle aches, and just this deep, profound fatigue. But the real signature of the disease is something called hemolytic anemia. That's the medical term for the massive destruction of red blood cells. As those cells burst, they release their contents, and that can lead to one of the most classic signs of a severe infection: dark, almost tea-colored urine. The way doctors confirm a diagnosis is actually pretty old school. They look at your blood under a microscope. And as you can see in this picture, lab technicians are searching for the actual parasites hiding inside the red blood cells. Sometimes, as the parasites multiply, they'll form this really distinct four-part structure that looks just like a Maltese cross. When a tech sees that, it's a dead giveaway for babesiosis. How the infection is treated really depends on how sick you are. For severe cases, which are often caused by that more aggressive Babesia divergens, the standard of care is a powerful IV combination of an antibiotic, clindamycin, and an antiparasitic drug, quinine. For the milder infections that are more typical of Babesia microti, patients are usually treated with 2 oral drugs, atofaquone and the antibiotic azithromycin. These are the international guidelines, and they're what's used in the Netherlands as well. So, knowing the symptoms and the treatments is vital, but obviously the best case scenario is to not get infected in the first place. With this threat emerging, what are the best ways to protect ourselves, and what's the game plan for managing babesiosis going forward?
Prevention really starts with us, with personal responsibility. All the classic tick advice still holds true. Use a good insect repellent, cover up when you're in grassy or wooded areas, and, this is the most important one, do a really thorough tick check on yourself, your kids, and your pets after being outside. On a bigger public health scale, a major focus is on protecting the blood supply, because it turns out babesiosis can also be transmitted through blood transfusions.
So, you might be wondering, why not just test every single blood donation? Well, in a country like the Netherlands, where babesiosis is still considered pretty rare, that's just not practical. So instead, the National Blood Bank, Sanquin, uses a different, really smart line of defense. They rely on a very strict screening questionnaire. They ask potential donors detailed questions about recent travel, any flu-like symptoms, and, of course, any tick bites. It's all about identifying and deferring anyone who might pose a risk. Just so you know, this explainer was put together using a Gemini deep search. And for anybody who wants to really dive into the data, you can find a complete list of all our sources in the Notebook LM document that we've linked for you. Hey, if you found this breakdown helpful, we'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel. And we'd genuinely love to hear from you, so please share your thoughts or any questions you have down in the comments section. And that brings us to our final and maybe the most important question to think about. The story of babesiosis emerging in the Netherlands is a perfect real-world example of how quickly things can change. It's a reminder that the maps we draw for diseases aren't permanent. So, as our climate and our environment continue to shift, it forces us to ask which rare disease will be the next one to emerge? Which foreign illness will be the next one to become a local problem? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for watching.